Before the rain started falling on the cracked pavement of Copper Row, before the neon sign of the hollow cup flickered twice and went dark, a woman behind a coffee counter said 3 words to a man pretending to be nobody. "You're lying." She didn't say it with anger. She didn't say it with accusation. She said it the way someone comments on the weather. Simple, factual, unremarkable. And the man who controlled half the city felt something he hadn't experienced in 26 years. He felt seen. The hollow cup sat on the corner of Delaney Street and West 4th, a narrow cafe wedged between a pawn shop with barred windows and a laundromat that had been closed since 1997. The building was old brick, the color of dried blood, with a green awning so faded by sun and rain it had turned the shade of week-old moss. The windows were clouded at the edges. The door stuck when it rained. And the chairs didn't match, because the owner had bought them from 3 different estate sales over the span of 11 years. It was the kind of place where people came to disappear, where nurses ended night shifts, and construction workers started early mornings, where old men read newspapers they had already finished, and young mothers pushed strollers without looking up. It was not the kind of place Stellan Vero had ever set foot in. For 43 years, Stellan had occupied a different world, penthouse apartments with views that cost more than most people earned in a decade. Restaurants where the menu had no prices because if you had to ask, you didn't belong. Cars with drivers who never spoke unless spoken to. And a reputation that moved through the city like smoke through a cracked window, invisible until you were already choking on it. He ran an organization that employed over 300 men. He had judges who owed him favors, politicians who returned his calls within the hour, and a network that stretched from the waterfront to the state capitol. People didn't cross Stellan Vero. They didn't question him. They didn't look him in the eye unless he invited them to. And they certainly didn't call him a liar. But today, Stellan wasn't Stellan. He wore a coat 2 sizes too big, purchased from a thrift store on 8th Avenue. His watch was a $15 digital thing with a scratched face instead of the Patek Philippe that sat in a velvet box in his bedroom. His shoes were scuffed, his hair was uncombed, and he had walked 6 blocks in the rain because the whole point was to arrive looking like someone who didn't have a car waiting. He had been doing this for 4 months now, visiting different parts of the city, different establishments, and different worlds, pretending to be broke. Pretending to be ordinary, pretending to be the kind of man that women might talk to without calculating his net worth in the first 3 seconds. Because Stellan Vero was tired of women who laughed at jokes that weren't funny because they knew who he was, tired of conversations that felt like auditions, tired of seeing his own reflection in their eyes and realizing they weren't looking at him at all. They were looking at what he could give them, what he could buy them, what doors he could open. His ex-wife Ginevra had said it best on her way out the door 20 years ago. "You're not a person, Stellan. You're a transaction." He had buried himself in work after that. Power. Control. He had told himself for 2 decades that he didn't need what other men needed. That love was a weakness. That connection was a liability. But 4 months ago, something had changed. He had attended the funeral of his underboss, a man named Croce who had worked beside him for 31 years. And at that funeral, Croce's wife had stood by the casket and whispered to her husband's body with such tenderness, such complete and unperformed grief, that Stellan had felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Nobody would ever love him that way. Nobody would ever speak to him that way, because nobody knew him. So he had started this experiment. 14 different cafes, restaurants, and bookshops. Every single time the mask had worked, they saw what he showed them. Until today. Until Marisol Sen. She stood behind the counter with a white towel over her shoulder and copper eyes that cut through him like a blade. She wasn't beautiful in the way magazines defined it. Her features were too sharp, her mouth too wide, her gaze too direct. But there was something about the way she stood, weight even on both feet, shoulders level, chin neither raised nor lowered, that made him think of soldiers, of people who had seen enough to stop pretending. "I'm sorry," Stellan said. "You said you're between jobs, that you've been walking all morning looking for work, that you stopped in here because it was the only place open." She refilled his coffee without asking. "There's a diner 2 blocks east that's been open since 5. A bakery across the street opens at 6. You walked past both of them." Stellan felt his pulse shift. Not fear. Something closer to interest. "What do you think I was looking for?" Marisol studied him for a moment. The cafe was empty except for an old man reading a newspaper by the window. "I don't know yet," she said, "but I'll figure it out." She walked away, leaving Stellan sitting at the counter with a question he couldn't answer. Who was this woman? And how had she seen through him in less than 3 minutes, when the rest of the world had been fooled for months? Marisol Sen had not always worked at the Hollow Cup. 7 years ago, she had been a fraud investigator for a private insurance firm called Kessler and Lyle. She had worn blazers, sat in conference rooms, and spent her days studying people, their faces, their micro-expressions, the way their hands moved when they told stories that weren't true. She had been good at it. Too good, perhaps. Good enough that she had noticed discrepancies in claims approved too quickly, payouts to companies that didn't exist, signatures that matched a little too perfectly. She had reported it, followed protocol, gone to her supervisor, documented everything, believed the system would work. The system had crushed her instead. Within 3 months, she had been dismissed for performance issues. Her reputation was quietly dismantled. Colleagues who had once been friends stopped returning her calls. And when she tried to find work at other firms, she discovered her name had been blacklisted in ways impossible to prove and impossible to fight. So Marisol Sen had disappeared. Not literally. She was still here, still breathing, still taking up space in a city that had tried to crush her. But the woman she had been, the career she had built, the future she had imagined, all of it had vanished like breath on a winter window. 5 years ago, she had walked into the Hollow Cup and asked if they were hiring. The owner, a 76-year-old widow named Gemma Torricelli, had looked at her for a long moment and said, "You look like someone who's been through something." Marisol had said, "Everyone's been through something." Gemma had hired her on the spot, and she had never stopped watching. That was the thing about being trained to spot deception. You couldn't turn it off. It became part of how you saw the world. The man at the counter this morning was a symphony of misalignment. His clothes said broke. His posture said power. His words said aimless. His eyes said calculating. His story said he had been walking all morning. His shoes said he had barely walked at all. He was pretending to be something he wasn't. That much was obvious. What Marisol didn't know yet was why. She picked up a rag and worked her way toward him. "You're still here," she said without looking up. "The coffee's good. The coffee is average. Same beans every diner in a 50-mile radius uses." "Then maybe I'm staying for the company." She met his eyes, gray-green, steady, giving nothing away. But they were giving something away now. Something that looked like hope. "Who are you?" she asked. "Nobody important." "That's the second lie you've told me today." The man smiled. Not warm, not cold. The smile of someone who wasn't used to being caught. "Can I come back tomorrow?" he asked. Every instinct told her this man was dangerous. Not violent. Powerful. Men who moved through the world rearranging it to suit their needs. But there was something else. Something underneath. "Door opens at 6, she said finally. And then she turned and walked into the back kitchen, leaving him alone with his average coffee and his expensive lies. That evening, Stellan sat in the small office at the back of his penthouse and stared at the wall. "You look troubled." Egan Thorne stood in the doorway. He was 51, bald by choice, built like a man who had spent his youth doing things that required strength and his middle age doing things that required patience. He had worked for Stellan for 19 years. Driver, bodyguard, confidant, and the closest thing Stellan had to a friend. "I met someone," Stellan said. "During your project?" "Yes." She saw through me. In less than 3 minutes. The clothes, the story, the performance. None of it worked. Egan's posture shifted. "That's concerning. If she recognized you." "She didn't recognize me. She doesn't know who I am. She just knew that who I was pretending to be wasn't real." Stellan leaned back and looked at the ceiling. "I've spent 4 months doing this. 14 different locations. Not one person ever questioned the act. They saw surfaces. They believed what was presented. This woman doesn't. Do you need me to look into her?" The question hung in the air. It was reasonable. Stellan Vero didn't leave variables uninvestigated, but something stopped him. "No. I want to find out who she is the old-fashioned way. By talking. By listening. By earning her trust instead of buying the information." Egan raised an eyebrow. "When I was 17, Stellan continued, my mother was dying. Cancer. We couldn't afford treatment. Not the real treatment. So I went to a man named Aldo Soretti and asked for a loan. In exchange, I gave him 3 years of my life. I did things I can't undo. Things that live in a locked room in my head." He paused. "My mother died anyway. The money bought her 4 extra months. And on the last night, she held my hand and made me promise something." "What?" She said, "Stellan, promise me you'll find someone who sees you. Not what you've done. Not what you've become. Just you. Promise me you won't die alone." Stellan's voice was steady, but something underneath was not. "I've broken that promise every day for 26 years. Because I built a life where being seen is dangerous. Where the real me is a liability. Where the only people who get close are the ones who want something." He looked at Egan directly. But this woman, Marisol, she saw through the disguise and didn't flinch. She didn't try to use it. She just stated it. Like seeing through people was as natural as breathing. "And you want to know why?" "I need to know why." Stellan returned the next morning at 6:15. He wore different clothes, a gray sweater with a small hole near the cuff, faded jeans, the same scuffed shoes. Marisol was behind the counter, slicing lemons with a knife that moved so quickly it blurred. She didn't look up when he entered. He sat at the same stool. She poured his coffee without asking. "You came back," she said. "You said the door opens at 6. Most people who say they'll come back don't." "I'm not most people." The corner of her mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. She checked on other customers, then returned and leaned against the back shelf. "So, are you going to tell me the truth today? What if I told you I don't know how to tell the truth anymore? That I've been wearing masks so long I've forgotten what my own face looks like?" Marisol studied him with the precision of someone cataloging evidence. "Then I'd say you're more honest than you think, because that's the first true thing you've said to me." The words landed somewhere in Stellan's chest and stayed there. "How do you do it?" he asked. "See through people like that?" "I used to do it for a living. Read people, spot lies, find cracks in stories." She paused. "I was good at it. Too good. It cost me everything." "What happened?" Her expression shifted. A slight tightening around the eyes, an almost imperceptible change in the set of her jaw. "That's a story for another day. If there is another day. There will be." She placed both hands flat on the counter, leaning forward slightly. "Let me tell you something. I don't know who you are. I don't know what you want. But I know you're not the man you're pretending to be. And whatever you're looking for, you're not going to find it by lying." What if I'm not lying to find something? What if I'm lying to escape something? Same problem, different direction. She picked up a rag and began wiping down the counter. Come back tomorrow, same time, but bring something real, a truth, even a small one, something that isn't performance. And if I do? Marisol stopped wiping. Her copper eyes held his. Then maybe I'll tell you my story, and you'll understand why I can see through people like you. She walked away before he could respond, and Stellan realized that for the first time in 26 years, someone had asked him for the one thing he wasn't sure he could give. The truth. Stellan did not sleep that night. He lay in his bed and tried to remember what it felt like to be honest. The last time he had told someone the complete truth about himself had been 1989. He had been 17 years old, sitting in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and despair, holding his mother's hand while machines beeped out the rhythm of her fading life. Her name had been Petra. She had been a seamstress before the cancer, working out of a small shop on Harmon Street that had been demolished 15 years ago to make room for a parking garage. She had made wedding dresses and christening gowns and, once, when Stellan was 9, she had sewn him a Halloween costume. A pirate, complete with a felt eye patch and a cardboard sword wrapped in aluminum foil. He had kept that sword in his closet until he was 23. Then he had burned it, along with everything else from that life, because the man he was becoming had no room for cardboard swords and felt eye patches. The man he was becoming had room only for steel. But lying in the dark of his penthouse, Stellan could still feel the weight of that cardboard sword in his hand, could still hear his mother's laughter when he had posed with it in front of her sewing machine. "You can be anything you want, Stellan," she had said. Anything at all. He had wanted to be good. He had ended up being powerful instead. At 5 in the morning, he went to his desk and opened the drawer where he kept things that mattered. A photograph of his mother from 1982, a silver lighter that had belonged to his father, and a folded piece of paper with a poem written in his own handwriting, composed when he was 19. He unfolded it carefully. "I built a house of iron and stone and called it Strength. I locked the doors. I pulled the blinds. I measured every length. But iron rusts and stone will crack, and strength becomes a cage. And all the doors I thought were locked were just another stage." He had never shown this to anyone. It was his secret, his small rebellion against the man he had become. At 6:20, he walked through the sticking door of the hollow cup. Marisol was there. She looked up when he entered, and something in her expression shifted. Recognition that today was different. He sat at his stool. She poured his coffee. "You look tired," she said. "I didn't sleep." He reached into his pocket and set the folded paper on the counter. "You asked me to bring something real. This is the truest thing I have." Marisol picked it up carefully, unfolded it, read it in silence. When she finished, she set it back on the counter. "The man who wrote this is not the man who walked into my cafe 2 days ago. Maybe he is. Maybe he's been hiding. From what? From himself. From what he became. From a life that was supposed to be a stepping stone but turned into a prison." Marisol was quiet. Then she told him about Kessler and Lyle, about the fraud she discovered, about the system that had crushed her. "I learned something important," she said. "Truth has a price. Most people aren't willing to pay it. Yet you still ask for it. Because I'd rather have a painful truth than a comfortable lie. I've lived inside comfortable lies. I know what they cost." Stellan felt the walls around him tremble. "My name isn't what I told you," he said. Marisol nodded slowly. "I know. You know. I knew you were lying about your name the moment you said it. Then why didn't you call me out?" "Because I wanted to see if you'd tell me the truth on your own. I wanted to know if you were the kind of man who could choose honesty when lying was easier." She pushed the poem back toward him. "Tomorrow. Same time. But bring your real name." She was gone before he could respond, and Stellan wondered if he was brave enough to give her the one thing that could destroy everything. That evening, Stellan did something he had not done in 11 years. He went to the cemetery. Evergreen Hills sat on the northern edge of the city, a sprawling expanse of headstones and oak trees. His mother lay beneath a simple granite stone. Beloved mother. She saw the good in everyone. Stellan stood there for a long time. The evening was cold. The last light of day was bleeding out of the sky. I met someone, he said finally. Her name is Marisol. She works in a cafe on Delaney Street. She sees through people the way you used to. He crouched down and brushed leaves off the base of the headstone. I've been lying for so long, Ma. I've been wearing masks for so long. I built this empire and told myself it was for protection, for survival. But I think I was building a cage. The same cage you tried to warn me about. His voice cracked slightly. Tomorrow she wants my real name, and if I give it to her, if I tell her who I actually am, it changes everything. She'll know about the organization. She'll know about the things I've done. He paused. But if I don't tell her, I lose her. I can feel it. She's not the kind of woman who tolerates half-truths. He touched the headstone gently. I'm scared, Ma. I haven't been scared of anything in 20 years. But this terrifies me. Because it's real. He stood up. But I'm going to try. In the car, Egan looked at him in the rearview mirror. I need you to prepare a file on myself, Stellan said. Everything that's public record. The organization, the holdings, the history. All of it. You're going to tell her. I'm going to give her the choice. Full information. No deception. Let her decide if she wants anything to do with who I actually am. That's a significant risk. I know. Egan was quiet for a moment. Your mother, he said finally. She would have approved of this. Stellan didn't respond, but as he walked to the elevator, he felt something loosen in his chest. Tomorrow, he would tell Marisol the truth. And whatever happened after that, at least he would finally be seen. The file was 3 inches thick. Stellan held it outside the hollow cup at 6:05. 43 years of a life, 26 years of an empire, all reduced to paper. He pushed open the sticking door. Marisol looked up. Something in her expression shifted. Recognition that today was different. He sat at his stool and set the file on the counter. My real name. My real life. Everything I've been hiding. She didn't touch it. You could have just told me. You're a woman who reads people for a living. You know the difference between words and evidence. I wanted you to have evidence. She opened the file. The first page was a photograph. Stellan Vero at a charity gala, wearing a tuxedo, shaking hands with the mayor. She turned pages slowly. Newspaper clippings, police reports, and then the section about the organization, the real organization. She stopped. You're him. The one they whisper about. The one who controls half this city. Yes, you're a criminal. By most definitions. She closed the file. Why? Why pretend to be broke? Why come to a place like this? Because I couldn't find anyone who saw me. In 26 years, not one person looked at me and saw anything other than the power, the money, and the reputation. They see what I can give them. They see the transactions they can make. He paused. I wanted to find someone who would see me when I had nothing to offer. When I was just a man in a bad coat with a cup of average coffee. And me? What did you want from me? Nothing. That's the point. You saw through everything in 3 minutes. And you didn't try to use it. You didn't try to leverage it. You just stated it. Marisol's jaw tightened. This organization. The things in this file. Do you hurt people? I have. I've done things I can't undo. Things that live in a locked room in my head. I'm not a good man by most measures. I'm not asking you to believe I am. Then what are you asking? I'm asking if you're willing to find out whether the man who wrote that poem still exists. I'm asking for a chance to be seen. She picked up the file and held it out to him. Take this back. I don't need paper to tell me who you are. I'll find that out myself. The old-fashioned way. By watching, by listening, by deciding if the man who walks through that door every morning is someone worth knowing. She poured him a cup of coffee. On the house. Consider it a reward for finally being honest. And Stellan Vero felt his eyes sting with something he hadn't experienced since his mother's funeral. He was seen. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of mornings at the Hollow Cup. 3 weeks of conversations that started shallow and went deeper each day. He learned that she lived alone above the laundromat, that she made her own pasta on Sundays because her grandmother had taught her, that she had once wanted to be a jazz singer before discovering she had no rhythm and less pitch. She learned things about him too, that he had memorized 63 poems, that he kept his mother's photograph in his desk drawer, that he had once let a rival go because the man had a daughter who reminded him of someone he might have had if his life had gone differently. On the 23rd morning, Marisol sat across from him in the booth near the back. I need to tell you something. The fraud I discovered at Kessler and Lyle, it went deeper than I told you. The shell companies that received the payouts were connected to organized crime, money laundering, millions flowing through fake claims. Stellan felt his chest tighten with sudden alertness. Which organization? I didn't know at the time, but I kept copies, documents, account numbers, names. Last week I finally traced the connection. Her copper eyes held his. It wasn't yours, but the organization it does belong to is run by someone who wants to destroy you, Benicio Corso. The name landed like a blow. Corso had been Stellan's underboss 15 years ago, before a disagreement about territory had led to a split that nearly erupted into war. He had spent 15 years waiting for the chance to strike. Corso has been laundering money through Kessler and Lyle for over a decade, Marisol said. The documentation I have could bring down his entire network. Why are you telling me this? Because you showed me your truth. Now I'm showing you mine. She reached across the table and touched his hand. What are we going to do about it? We're going to bring them down. All of them. Corso, the executives, the senators, everyone who profits from other people's silence. Her grip on his hand tightened. And then? Then we figure out who we are when we're not fighting. The plan took 2 weeks to assemble. Stellan brought in Egan and 3 trusted men. Marisol retrieved 4 boxes of files from a safety deposit box in Sefton Park. Documents that painted corruption so vast it implicated 3 financial institutions and 7 elected officials. On the 12th night, everything changed. They were alone in the warehouse when Stellan's phone buzzed. You need to get out of there, Egan said. Now. There's a convoy heading your way. 6 vehicles. Armed. 12 minutes. Marisol was already gathering the most critical documents. These account numbers and wire transfers. This is the core. Everything else can be reconstructed. They made it out in 2 minutes. 6 blocks away, the first explosion lit up the night sky behind them. The other documents, Marisol said. Gone. But you kept the core? That's what matters. At a motel on the city's edge, Egan delivered more bad news. Corso knows who she is. He's put a $200,000 bounty on her head. Rage surged through Stellan like fire through dry timber. Then we move faster. We use what we have. There's a state senator, Harlan Vickers, who signed off on the fraud. Men like that are always looking for an exit when the ship starts sinking. Marisol's eyes narrowed. You want to flip him. I want to give him a choice. Testify against Corso or go down with him. Senator Vickers's estate had security designed to stop reporters, not people who actually wanted to get in. At 2 in the morning, Stellan and Marisol entered through a window with a faulty sensor. They found him in his study, drinking bourbon alone. Good evening, Senator. Vickers spun around. His face went white. How did you... Marisol placed her hand over his as he reached for the phone. I wouldn't. Recognition dawned in his eyes. The investigator, Marisol Sen, you were supposed to be gone. You made sure I couldn't work, but you didn't make sure I stopped watching. She dropped a folder on his desk. These prove you were complicit in laundering $40 million for Corso. They prove you accepted bribes to shut down my investigation. Vickers's face went gray. What do you want? Testimony, Stellan said. Full cooperation with the federal investigation. In exchange, you resign quietly. Health reasons? Corso will kill me. Corso won't be able to kill anyone from federal prison. Vickers slumped in his chair. The fight had gone out of him. When do we start? Now, Marisol said. We start right now. The federal investigation moved faster than anyone expected. Once Vickers began talking, dominoes fell in rapid succession. 3 Kessler and Lyle executives were arrested within a week. 2 more were apprehended at the Canadian border. The shell companies that had funneled money to Corso's organization were frozen, their assets seized. And Corso, the man who had waited 15 years to destroy Stellan, found his empire collapsing around him. The arrest happened on a Tuesday morning. Federal agents swarmed his compound, emerging 40 minutes later with Corso in handcuffs. Stellan watched from a parked car 2 blocks away. Marisol sat beside him. It's finished, she said. 2 days later, Margaret Callahan, the attorney Stellan had retained to handle the case, called with news Marisol had stopped hoping to hear. The blacklist had been rescinded. Her license to practice as a fraud investigator was reinstated. 3 different firms had already reached out with employment offers. When the call ended, she didn't move for a long time. Stellan watched her from the window. You can go back, he said, to your old life, to the career they took from you. I know. Is that what you want? Marisol was quiet. She looked around the hotel room, then looked at him. 3 months ago, I was pouring coffee in a cafe that smelled like burnt beans and broken dreams. I had accepted that my life was going to be small, that the woman I used to be was gone forever. She stood up. Then a man walked through the door pretending to be broke, and I saw through him in 3 minutes. 2 minutes, Stellan corrected. You said it yourself. The corner of her mouth twitched. 2 minutes. And in those 2 minutes, something changed. Not because of who you turned out to be, but because you asked me to see you. The real you. And that reminded me that there was a real me, too. She crossed the room and stood before him. I don't want my old life back. I want a new one. One where I choose who I am instead of letting others define me. One where I wake up in the morning and know that the person beside me sees me, actually sees me, the way I see him. Stellan looked at this woman who had dismantled his defenses, who had demanded truth when lies would have been easier, who had fought beside him against an enemy that threatened to destroy them both. And you want that person to be me? I don't want anything. I'm choosing. There's a difference. He recognized his own words. I'm not an easy man to be with. I'm not an easy woman. I have a past that would make most people run. I have a future that most people couldn't handle. I wrote poetry when I was 19. I sing jazz in the shower despite having no rhythm and less pitch. Something cracked inside Stellan. Not breaking. Opening. A door sealed for 26 years swinging wide on hinges he had forgotten existed. He reached out and touched her face. Her skin was warm beneath his fingers. My mother made me promise something before she died. She made me promise I'd find someone who saw me, all of me, and didn't look away. And I've been breaking that promise for 26 years, until I walked into a cafe on Delaney Street and met a woman who called me a liar before I finished my first cup of coffee. Marisol's eyes glistened. So, what are you saying? I'm saying I want to keep that promise. Finally. With you. And then, in a hotel room on the edge of a city that had tried to destroy them both, Stellan Vero kissed Marisol Sen for the first time. And the boy behind the wall felt the bricks begin to come down. 1 year later, on an October afternoon so clear it hurt to look at, a woman in a charcoal blazer walked through the sticking door of the hollow cup. The cafe hadn't changed. The bell still rang. The windows were still clouded at the edges. The chairs still didn't match. And the coffee was still average. But the woman had changed. Marisol Sen was 41 now. She owned a fraud investigation firm with 12 employees and contracts with 3 state agencies. She had testified before Congress twice. And she had married Stellan Vero 6 months ago in a small ceremony in Sefton Park, where his mother was buried and where she had hidden the documents that brought down an empire. She sat at the counter, the same stool where Stellan had sat on that first morning, and waited. Gemma poured her coffee. He's late. He likes to make an entrance. The door opened. Stellan walked in wearing a coat that fit him properly and shoes that weren't scuffed, carrying a small gift bag. He sat beside her. You're late. I'm memorable. There's a difference. Gemma snorted from behind the counter. He set the gift bag between them. What's this? Open it. Inside was a velvet box. When she opened it, her breath caught. A silver pendant on a delicate chain. Engraved on the surface, I built a house of words and trust and called it home. The last 2 lines, she said softly, of the poem you never finished. It took me 24 years, but I finished it. Put it on me. He clasped it around her neck. His fingers brushed her skin. Happy anniversary. It's been 1 year since our first conversation, not our wedding. That conversation was when everything started, when you called me a liar and I realized I wanted to spend my life proving you right. Marisol laughed, real, unguarded. You're ridiculous. Gemma set 2 plates of pancakes before them. On the house. For the 2 people who think I don't notice they've been taking my best seats every Tuesday for a year. They ate slowly. Not because they were trying to make the food last, but because they had learned that moments like this were worth savoring. When the plates were empty, Stellan pulled out a folded paper. One more gift. It was a deed. To the building on the corner of Delaney Street and West 4th. You bought the hollow cup? The building. Gemma keeps running the cafe as long as she wants. After that, it becomes whatever you want. Why? Because this is where I found you. This is where I stopped pretending. I don't want this place to disappear. I want it to stay exactly what it is. A place where people can walk in wearing masks and walk out with something real. Marisol looked at this man who had pretended to be broke to find something real, who had shown her his wounds and asked to see hers, who had chosen her every single day for a year. You know what I love most about you? My impeccable timing? Your terrible coffee taste. Stellan laughed. For the first time in 26 years, it came from somewhere deep and unguarded. Somewhere that had been locked away so long he had forgotten it existed. She squeezed his hand. Let's come back next Tuesday. And the Tuesday after that? And all the Tuesdays after that. They left the cafe together, stepping into an October afternoon that smelled like coffee and possibility. The door stuck behind them. The bell rang. They walked down Delaney Street with hands intertwined, and they didn't look back. Because looking back was for people who doubted what they had built. And Stellan and Marisol had no doubts. Not about this. Not anymore.